Now, the co-chief executive of the Executive Council of Australian Jewry, Peter Wertheim, urged the coalition not to make perfect enemy of good when it comes to these hate speech laws that go before the Parliament next week. This is some of what he had to say on Sky today.
My message to both is let's try and get this done. If this bill fails to pass in any form, then we are left with the status quo, and it's effectively going to leave us with our political leaders telling the country, after what happened at Bondi Beach last month, that the status quo is okay. We can live with it. And frankly, we can't live with it.
Happy to say the other co-chief executive of the Executive Council of Australian Jewry, Alex Ryvchin, joins me now. Alex, do you obviously agree with what Peter had to say there?
I do, and I think we need to bear in mind that we're not having a mere academic discussion about competing rights and interests and freedoms. We're where we are because this country has permitted a situation where on October 7 you could have an Islamic cleric standing on the streets of West Sydney and inciting his followers to slaughter, rape and abduct Jews, to call that effectively a religious duty. And the following day we had a mob that shared the exact ideology of the Bondi murderers, chanting, "O Jews, the armies of Muhammad are coming," and they were beyond the reach of the law. And for months after that, we had cleric after cleric inciting against our community, using their positions of authority, hiding behind religious texts, and endangering our community. And again, they were beyond the reach of the law. It was left to my organisation, the ECAJ, to bring an action under the civil law of Section 18C of the Racial Discrimination Act, which frankly is wholly inadequate for such serious offences. So this is why we can't allow this situation to continue. We need laws in this country which bring consequences upon those who incite hatred, which, as we've seen, leads to death and violence. So I firmly support the laws. They may not be perfect, and we've criticised them in certain regards, and I think the Liberals and the Labor Party need to get together and iron out any differences between them, work through any challenges, exclude the Greens from that process. They have nothing to contribute to this beyond more anti-Semitism. And we need to get to a result because there's too much at stake for the community and wider society.
What do you say to those who've read the bill and the particular part of the legislation that would allow preachers to use religious texts to make threats like they have already had, and that would not then trigger these laws? I mean, surely that is a failing.
It is, but the context is critical. It's similar to the use of the swastika, for example. If someone uses Nazi imagery in the teaching of the Holocaust and the rise to power, then that's obviously legitimate as a historical exercise. If one does so as a means of recruiting or inciting violence or glorifying Nazism, that's obviously prohibited. And we've had a situation in this country for a considerable period of time, even before October 7, where clerics have used religious texts not to hold them up as something outdated or something antiquated or irrelevant, but actually as something that Muslims today are obligated to do and perform in pursuit of their religious duties and obligations. So that is wholly inadequate. That is absolutely unacceptable. We cannot have people using religious texts to incite violence against fellow Australians in the present day. So it's all a question of the application of the law, how the courts choose to interpret it. But if the carve-out is strict and narrow, then I think it's fine. But if it's done in a way that allows clerics to hide behind scripture and incite violence against fellow Australians, that's utterly unacceptable and defeats the purpose of the law.
So that needs to be extracted from the bill?
Well, I think that's something that needs to be looked at, and we said so immediately. It's not something which we favour, and it kind of stops short of where we would like to see the act fall. But at the same time, as Peter said, perfection may be the ultimate goal, but when you're talking about matters of legislation and drafting, it's rarely attainable. But this is why we want to see Labor and Liberals sit down, put aside political differences, think solely of the welfare of our society, and work through these issues and arrive at some sort of an accommodation and an outcome for the good of our society.
Given what your community's been through over the last 2 years and your advocacy has been outstanding, is it not possible to speak to the leadership of the Labor Party? And I agree with you, you've got to wipe the Greens out of the question completely. The leaders of the Labor Party and the coalition and say, listen, You don't have to rush, but you need to get it right, and you need to do it as soon as you can. But there seems to be this. I mean, it's a month on from Bondi.
Yeah.
I would have thought it could have been done earlier, but can't they get together as mature Australians? They're supposed to be leaders. Sit down with you and sit down with the Muslim leadership that are in favour of some of these laws as well, and get a better result.
I believe so, Steve. There's nothing in practice to stand in the way of that, of leaders putting aside differences, putting the national interest first on a matter of such importance to our society and the future of our communities, and to get this done. And again, to exclude the Greens from the process and not allow them to have any input into this law. If they had their way, they would send it in a whole new direction to defend their anti-Semitic, pro-Palestinian activism. So we need to ensure that leadership prevails here. And we hear leaders talk about, putting partisanship aside and working together and going beyond politics. But too often that sort of phrase is used as a veil for political maneuvers. And I think that's what we're seeing at the moment. But we want to see the leaders get together. We want to see community have its interests heard and addressed. That's what's at stake here. We had a situation where these killers were able to be indoctrinated, where they were consumed with an ideology and then carried out the mass slaughter of Jewish people on Bondi Beach. It did not come through a spontaneous act. It did not come through a mental disorder. It came through a process of indoctrination, of radicalization, and that's what we need to root out. No one wants to see the rights of debate and free speech tinkered with or limited in any way whatsoever. We've been beneficiaries of that right. We've engaged in public debate on all matters of importance to our community and society for years, and we want to preserve that. But we're talking about something that goes beyond considered debate. We're talking about people using their positions of authority to threaten communities and incite hatred, which leads to violence, the most extreme elements of that. And I think there's too much at stake for politics to take over this process.
Well, again, congratulations on your advocacy and talking to us on such a regular basis. Alex, you've done an extraordinary job. Thank you. And I hope the day of mourning next week is something that satisfies your community.